Jamie, these numbers are simply eye-watering. Many people are saying they are unsustainable, but they don't even take into account things like population, birth booms of those arriving in. The true figure, Jamie, could actually be much, much higher.
Yeah, good afternoon. It could be much higher because the way the ONS compile the figures, Martin, is they'll look at kind of the population going forward. They'll estimate the number of births and deaths, and the birth numbers will kind of be determined in terms of how many people of childbearing age we would expect in the population. That's not too difficult to project. And then you've got the deaths, so we know we've got an aging population, so we'd expect more deaths in the future. But the migration number could actually be on the low point. So the numbers you just quoted could be much higher. And the reason for that is if we go from 2027 onwards, they're projecting that we'll have a net immigration figure of 315,000. Now, if you look at what we've seen in the last couple of years, we've had figures that are more than double that, 700,000 net migration. So to get this kind of population going up to about 6-7 million now over the next 14-15 years, if we get the migration numbers that we've seen in the last couple of years, it could be much higher than that. And the issue there, Martin, is it puts huge pressure on public services. And if we don't have the right figures, or if they're too much of an underestimate, we don't build enough houses, we don't have enough reservoirs, we don't have enough railway, road, etc. And the quality of life for everybody diminishes.
Exactly right. And the figures, it's 156,000 new homes every year will need to be built to cope with those numbers. That's basically building a new Nottingham, my home city, every year to accommodate 315,000. Let's face it, we're not going to do that, are we, Jamie? At the moment, we're not building anywhere near that number. And anyhow, isn't the answer to control those coming in rather than simply accommodating for those who arrive?
Well, I think so. Remember, we've had pledges from the Conservative Party in the past. David Cameron, let's get migration down to the tens of thousands. And we've seen huge population growth over the last 10 or 20 years through migration. And the figures you quoted there on housing, I think a stark reminder to people is that if you go back to 1997, around the time Tony Blair was elected, the average kind of house price to what you earn was about 3.5 times. In 2022, it's over 8 times now. So the huge migration we've seen over the last 25 years or so, when you add on top of the fact that wages haven't gone up as much, means that it's just unaffordable because we haven't built enough houses. And if that continues in the future, young people getting on the housing ladder got no chance.
And Jamie, that brings me to the next point. A simple supply and demand equation for everything. As you mentioned, water, we're going through droughts every year, not because of climate change, but because we just aren't building any new reservoirs. And the likelihood of that happening because of planning restrictions is small. And yet we're putting on 10% on our population by 2036. We won't have more houses. We won't have more GPs. We won't have more schools. Or if we want to supply them, there's going to be a catastrophically high public purse impact. Has any of this been costed up?
I don't think so. And you've only got to look at today in terms of what's happened with a lack of planning with, say, the NHS, Martin, because if you look now, we've got the number of pensioners. We've been projecting, ageing population and growth in pensioners, which puts more demand on the NHS. But have we got the staff to cope with that? No. So we've got record waiting lists. Will they put the plans in place in the next 15 years off the back of these numbers? Probably not. You know what governments are like. They'll work on 5-year terms. These figures are giving you a kind of an idea of where we're going to be going for the next 15 years. And it's just a stark reminder, more and more people does reduce the quality of life for individuals in the country if you don't actually accept that if you get more people, you need to put more investment into better infrastructure. Without that, the immigration figures are quite starkly kind of worrying.
And Jamie, from a purely statistical point of view, politically neutral point of view, when you look at these numbers, when you look at the associated costings of house building, of service provision, of building reservoirs, and then the burden on the taxpayer for an ageing population, an increased NHS, all the rest of it, is this a model of a country that's even remotely sustainable?
I don't think so. You're just looking at the pensioner part of that. We're going to see an increase from around 12 million to 15 million pensioners over the next 15 years. That's going to put a huge cost on the state pension. And it's kind of in part why the government's increasing the age at which you can draw the state pension. So all of this hasn't been kind of costed, Martin. And ultimately, the next government, obviously it's odds on for the Labour Party to be in power, but the next government really needs to look to the medium to long term, not just the next 4 to 5 years.
Yeah, and Jamie, just one final stat to end on. These figures also included this: an additional 1 million people in the UK aged 85 or over in the next 15 years. Jamie, these are the people who have the most expensive demands on the NHS, because we know we're living longer and end-of-life care is the most expensive, and an increased pension burden. Jamie Jenkins, thank you for joining us. I don't think they've costed any of this up. I think we're heading for economic suicide if we go down this route. That's just my take on it. Jamie Jenkins, an independent statistician and a political commentator, thank you very much for joining us on the show.